Hello and welcome to Climate Check with me, Mary Mwiikisa. Now today on the program, we're focusing on community voices on responsible mining and climate resilient futures. Now, as Zambia continues to increase production of its minerals, creating jobs and developing the country, we cannot ignore the fact that environmental protection is our responsibility. And so we'll be focusing on these and many other issues on how we can achieve sustainable development, even in the mining sector. This is Climate Check. We'll take a short break. On the other side, I will introduce my guest. Now imagine if trees could provide Wi-Fi, just how many trees you would plant? Well, they provide oxygen. We definitely cannot do without it. Destruction of nature, such as forests, has led to irreversible climatic changes to our world. Join me as I talk to policy formulators, change makers, and climate change interest groups on Climate Check, weekly on this channel. Now you are the solution to climate change.
Zambia's Copperbelt, the beating heart of the nation's economy. For a long time now, these mines have powered industries, built cities, and promised prosperity. But beneath that promise lies a heavy price, paid by those who live closest to the mines.
Living in a mining area, it's not easy because lots of pollutions happen. Number one, water pollution. Yes, the water is very much polluted. Nama chemicals there for mine. Cause ngatolesha ama streams there pita moyonsa ya fumi na kumine. So elama chemicals onsa ya kumine ya pita ma streams mgazeni. Ela mpona mkafishwa river. So most of the times, you know, I mean, shara polluted. And the water nkana themselves, they'll come to say, no, today, I mean, shumuitapa. Yadi polluted. Maybe later konama water bowsers fiafini because of the water's face diarrhea. Na mumala fesana such that the motoratino kia mukuta pa mensha ya kuna fera any direct. Turamuta pa kuma balls pa machai cheze mashani aba kwa tama balls ile ma pure water.
Wusakile, once a proud mining township, now sits under a haze of chemical dust and fear. The community's daily life revolves not around progress, but survival.
Ama challenge tukwata sana ni noise pollution na dust pollution. Ilo na vibration ya mgodi. For example, kuno moku twalisa tampo ta complain. Mnando kwa tilo vale chisa tupata. Ama ndalisa tampo kwa tama crack. So twalisa ta report kuiba mine. So balisa some community no research da assess. Mando na unaike balifu kutatabe ni babate compensate. Ni wasenda tete ni te compensate. Instead balisa tumafi abantu bakisa mkuamia. Tumanda tutwa unaike babika mu kuamia. Balisa tampo kubika tuma crack monitors. Muma crack munamune pude mwana movement. In case ngaje balita plastic ngaje utama ama crack yale expand. Twalisa bomba na bokwatu almost 8-9 years. Yeah, so here is putula sana during the coronavirus. There is isa. Bashende ndikuti at first wala imini akali itakuwa duma movement. So after yasa apwelia balabanta babwelele yo. So kumapala peni for try minina. Tabashire wela yo.
Zambia's mining wealth has long been tied to people's lives. But as the walls crack, so does the trust. Across the Copperbelt, the air and water, once life-giving, now carry death in invisible forms. Acid rains, sulfur dioxide, and toxic effluents have turned rivers into chemical streams.
Tuli abalimi abene nga kuchimwamona tulila mu gardens. So ama gardens nga twalima, first we start with ama vegetables. Nga twafunyamu ama vegetables tulabikamu amataba. Nga twafunyamu amataba tulabikamu cabbage. Nga twafunyamu cabbage tulesamu kubikamu ama carrots. So effort tuchita survive through ama gardens. Isho shinendala manga twashitisha tulalipilila bana kuma skulu ama medical bills na ukuyifuika tuyifuikira ama gardens. Nomba apo imaini yaishira kwena obulimi nabo bwashupa. Pantu nangu mwinga byala efintu kuchifya isafya bwino eventually fyapya kuchimwamuna na repwe taile moneka health.
Ba Longsing na ba CCS baliona ulamenshi from the starting ya Kakamana Kalwela up to Mwambashi River. Isabiri ali muri Kalwela stream work. Abantu bali amkulo besabi ashitisha ashitofya refwa. This time utamwaba. Even in Mwambashi was collided na sinometo. Bonse fya ishire chitikira fye mukukonkana. Ya chita bust ku sinometos. Papita fya a week na pena pa fya chita bust. Abantu bachita complain wa government baisa. Bati bale fuma kofye bashala bale bomba. Twaipusha nomba kuti bashala shani bale bomba ba. After all aba pango mulandi unishina bali pira. Until again ba minister baisa abwera. Kwe bati yo isaleni. Epa kuisala Longsing.
Would want to see that the laws stipulates to how the communities that are affected by the mining communities can benefit immediately from the mines. The other aspect that we would want to see is the corporate social responsibility need now to speak to a law on how it should be. And we are proposing as Futurepreneur, let it not be corporate social responsibility, let it be corporate social investment.
You need to have a law that says you must reinvest this amount of money in this sector where you are mining. If you don't put it that way, I decide where to take my social corporate responsibility. I take it to boxing, I take it to the bar, I take it to golf, I take it to football. When you say you're not doing anything, I say, here, I'm doing something.
Now, the Copperbelt is the hub of mining in Zambia. Of course, we now have Northwestern Province coming in as well. But because of this subject, I decided to invite Professor Feni Mwanga, who is Associate Professor Environment Toxicology at the Copperbelt University in Kitwe. Prof, thank you so much for joining us on Climate Check.
Thank you. I'm glad to join you.
All right. Let's first appreciate your general assessment of mining activities in Zambia. How are we faring as a country?
Well, to begin with, from what you have said, that mining by its very nature is very destructive. Indeed, of course it is. But I think there is one of the things that probably needs to be done, and that is responsible mining. Because when you are going to mine, meaning you are getting whether you are using open pit or you are using underground mining, you definitely have to get the rock which contains the mineral of interest from there up to the surface. And obviously there are going to be effects and negative effects for that matter. What is required really is to make sure that you minimize the negative impact of those activities. And probably that's where a lot of effort has to be focused.
Okay. As a country, we are targeting to increase copper production by about 3 million metric tons by the year 2031. This means more mining activities. This means more harm to the environment. Is it possible to achieve sustainable mining as a country?
Of course it is. Just to get to what you mentioned, that the country plans to produce about 3 million tons a year in the next few years. You might be interested to know that since mining started in Zambia about 100 years ago, for all this period, Zambia has produced about 30 million tons of copper. 30 million tons. Now, here is what is interesting. That 30 million tons was probably gotten from the rock that contained maybe 5% of the copper.
Okay.
So now, if that is the case, then you can imagine the amount of ground or material that was hoisted from the underground to the surface. And after removing, and mind you, the process of removing copper, because there are many stages, it's not 100%. So you are talking about probably, if the grade was 5%, you are talking about probably 4.5 or 4.8% removal. And then you have all these. So if you take, for example, 4% or 5% of 30 million, of the material that produced 30 million tons, you are talking about 60 billion tons of material from the ground. And all this is going to occupy the space that probably will be required for people to do farming, to build houses, to do ranching, and several other commercial activities. So this is now the picture that we have to begin to think about.
Okay.
So meaning that if that happens to be the case, then obviously, to answer your question, it is possible really to have sustainable mining. All we have to do is to maybe increase the conversation about the minimization of the negative impact of mining among all stakeholders. And I think when that conversation is raised to higher levels, by higher levels, I mean also stakeholders being involved and being honest with each other. And I think solutions will be found where, of course, there have to be some trade-offs.
Let's talk about the impact of mining activities, not only on the environment, but in the communities surrounding these mining entities.
Well, there are several other, of course, there are several effects actually that can result. For example, during the mineral processing stages, there may be some emissions, for example, dust, fumes, and others that may emanate from there and going to nearby communities. And obviously, when that is realized, certain efforts have to be made to ensure that that is brought to the minimum. And those are some of the conversations that need to be elevated so that people begin to voice out, and then certain necessary actions need to be taken. Now, we must realize that mining is capital intensive.
Yes.
It is labor intensive, but it is also highly mechanized. And because of that, sometimes the environmental aspects are taken to be secondary. And there are very few people who would want to spend so much money on ameliorating environmental damage. In fact, what helps actually is the environmental law that is available that helps to keep certain mining entities in check so that as much as they extract the mineral from the ground, they are also by law forced to ensure that their mining activities is within the parameters that would not irreparably damage the environment.
Now, let's talk about, for example, pollution in places where they are doing activities that, as a result, naturally, there will be pollution. Is there a way in which mining companies can reduce on this pollution, maybe by the dust and ore?
Oh, yes, because in all those processes, there are certain technologies that are available. Of course, they cost money, where they can reduce the dust emissions or whether gaseous emissions, all those can be reduced. And that can be done through investment in such.
Okay. And in places where there are displacements happening, I'm meant to believe that these cases happen, especially when explorations have happened and minerals are found in particular locations. How should these people be treated? Because they're also feeling the impact of mining because they're moved from homes where they have this cultural identity, where they have lived all these years. How do you think, or what do you recommend should be the best way to handle such situations in order to achieve a win-win situation?
Well, the law already exists. how you treat the people that may be relocated. But again, of course, even if the law exists, I think one of the most important things to do is to engage the people, have some discussion, explain, and also, of course, not only the advantages, but also the disadvantages. And then after that discussion, then you begin to see people softening. I think that is the only, of course, the law provides that if you're going to relocate people from the place where they are staying or they have been staying for a long time because of some minerals that have been discovered there, I think there's adequate law that provides for that. But over and above the law, it is always important to have conversation and discussion, agreements and disagreements. Over time, people will always be persuaded if they are shown that this is a greater good for them, for their children, and for the country.
Okay. Now, Prof, we have also heard of cases where some communities that live around the mining towns, mining areas, may have their homes develop some cracks. I'm not sure of this, but we have heard of such cases because of the impact of blasting. And in most cases, these people, the value of their homes continues to go down. How should such cases be treated in order for the people to also not feel disadvantaged by the very activity that should benefit them ultimately as citizens?
Well, generally, what happens in such cases, of course, normally there should be some evaluation and to confirm that the blasting activities or mineral-related activities were responsible for such damage. And there is adequate registration to that effect, and compensation normally would be affected. And in most cases, what would happen is, because you're not just going to build or repair the same house at a place which is experiencing such. So what you'd probably do is to relocate people to a safer place so that even if they are given or they are built new houses, such damage would not occur.
That's very true. Now, you spoke earlier about how we have laws that are already in place and regulations that govern most of these activities. And we have organizations, for example, like ZEMA, who are mandated with specific tasks, but then they have a point to which their terms of reference end. For example, they may not be able to enforce certain aspects of the law. How then can we ensure compliance from all mining entities in this country to ensure that they don't ignore the requirements for environmental protection?
Well, I'm not very sure when you say there are certain aspects of the law which they cannot enforce. First of all, with regard to mining, you have, I think you have, of course, ZEMA, you have Mine Safety Department, and you have several other government departments. Now, I think the law itself, I can tell you that the environmental legislation in Zambia, with regard to environmental pollution, it's one of the best legislations that you can ever look at. Probably the problem that may be talking about is how is the implementation. Implementation may be the problem. And when you talk about implementation, you also want to look at, do we have the technical capacity? By technical capacity, I'm talking about two things. Do we have staffing levels at these institutions that have been given the mandate to enforce the law? And if you have sufficient staffing levels, maybe we can also look at, do they have sufficient tools with which to be able to carry out these mandates? I think those are some of the things we may begin to be looking at. And obviously, I'm not saying that they are not sufficiently staffed or they are sufficiently staffed. I'm not very sure they are currently staffing levels, and also the capacity in terms of the tools that they need. However, they have other avenues through which they can enforce this. For example, they can work with universities who may also have some capacity to some extent. Working together, they can pull up their, and have synergies in order to implement these environmental legislation. But What I may not be sure is that there is any part of the law under their mandate which they cannot implement except for the fact that they are insufficiently staffed.
Okay. We have so many policies in this country that is agreeable, and I agree with you when you talk about the implementation. It may not only be ZEMA, but we have so many policies that we are not fully implementing in order to benefit from the very reason these policies are formulated, especially around the mining sector. Help me understand or appreciate what should happen in the ideal when a mine closes, its lifespan has clocked. What happens, especially to the environment? What should happen?
Well, when the mine closes, again, there is some legislation to that effect, but I'm aware there is the Environmental Protection Fund that normally these mining houses pay as they are operating. I have not critically looked at the nitty-gritty, but I can assure you that probably even that fund may need revisiting, because I don't think that it sufficiently addresses the real issues that may arise after closure. Well, first, I did mention in my preamble that for the last 100 years that Zambia has been mining, we have had 30 million tons of copper only as a metal. You are not talking about the waste. Now, the waste associated with that is probably 95% more than the 30 million tons. Now, that material is sitting around, and some of it may contain potentially some harmful elements, which need to be taken care of. And so when the closure has happened, there's a lot that needs to be done to make sure that the environment is rehabilitated, so that probably as much as it's possible, certain commercial activities can take place there. Because if that is not done, then that place has been subtracted from the commercial land that other people should be able to use for their livelihood.
What should happen? How can communities play a role in ensuring that they are aware of what's happening, they are aware of their rights, and be part of these conversations that border on their well-being? Because decisions are made and they're not part of the decision makers. And in communities, we think of traditional leaders, church leaders, academia, and all these other aspects of community.
Well, what should happen is, first of all, like you have put it, communities must have interest in things that happen in their communities, the developmental activities, and the communities must demand. They must demand development through their representatives, whether it be chiefs or political representatives, so that they can also voice their concerns. Now, one of the things that should happen is that sometimes, of course, it should be obvious that if people are doing certain activities that have negative impact on the environment, it is always assumed that they are fully aware. However, but when they hear the kind of impact to those that are affected and they are communicated to, I think there would be some good understanding where the operators and the communities in which the operations are taking place, they will come to a certain understanding. After all, any mining institution or any industry that operates in a given society or community needs to have what they call a social license.
Prof, thank you so much for making time to speak to us. And I know that we have almost spoken about every other issue, but very quickly, Prof, as CBU, what areas of interest in the mining sector are you looking into to contribute value to this very important industry?
Oh, well, thank you so much for that question. Actually, CBU probably, each university has a niche in terms of its training programs.
Okay.
I can assure you that CBU is one such university that has such robust training programs in mining-related fields, to the extent that wherever you go, you find the CBU-trained mining professionals with the high caliber.
We have come to the end of the program for this week. I'll be back next week, same time, same channel. Remember to play your part in protecting the environment as well as climate justice. Thank you for watching the program. My name is Mary Mwiikisa. Goodbye.